I am Amber, 29 years old, and I never thought my art expertise would save me from family exile. Returning home for Thanksgiving after 5 years away felt like walking into a beautiful trap. My sister Natalie always was the golden child, while I remained the disappointment. What I did not know was that this dinner would change everything when I placed that folder on the table. Where are you watching from today? I would love to know in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if family drama resonates with you. Have you ever felt betrayed by those who should love you most? Let me tell you my story. Growing up in our upper-middle-class home in suburban Boston shaped who we all became. Our family had a reputation to maintain in the community, something my parents, Eleanor and Richard, never let us forget. From the beginning, the contrast between my sister Natalie and me was stark and unmistakable. Being 3 years older, Natalie set a standard I could never seem to reach. Our childhood home was a spacious colonial with perfectly manicured lawns and an interior straight from design magazines. My parents worked hard for their success, my father building a financial advisory firm from scratch, while my mother managed their growing art collection, a hobby that turned into a significant investment over the years. They had expectations for both their daughters, but those expectations were never equal. Natalie excelled at everything that mattered to our parents. Her straight, as in school, particularly in mathematics and economics, made them beam with pride. When she became president of the debate club and captain of the tennis team, my father would tell everyone at his business dinners. Her path was clear from early on. She would follow him into the family business and eventually take over. I, on the other hand, was drawn to art and creativity. While Natalie calculated and strategized, I painted and sketched. My room was filled with canvases and art supplies, not trophies and academic awards. My mother would occasionally compliment my work, but always with a hint of disappointment that I had not inherited her business acumen for collecting rather than creating. Art is a wonderful hobby, Amber, but it is not a career, she would say, patting my shoulder with a pitying smile. The pattern of favoritism was clear in countless small moments. When Natalie received early admission to Princeton, my parents threw an elaborate party for 50 guests. When I was accepted to Rhode Island School of Design, they simply nodded and asked about scholarship opportunities. They celebrated her birthday with weekend trips to New York, while mine warranted a cake and perhaps a new set of brushes. The first major betrayal came during my junior year of high school. I had spent months working on a mixed media piece for the regional art competition. Late nights hunched over my work, pouring my heart into every detail. The piece explored family dynamics through abstract figures in a shared space, separate yet connected by invisible threads. It was deeply personal, and to my surprise, it won first place. The local newspaper wanted to interview me, and when they came to our house, Natalie somehow inserted herself into the conversation. Before I knew what was happening, she was explaining my artistic process as if she had been my guide and mentor. She claimed she had helped conceptualize the piece, that we had worked on it together during sister art sessions that never existed. Amber has such raw talent, and I have been teaching her about composition and color theory, she told the reporter, while my parents nodded approvingly. When the article appeared with a photo of both of us and credits mentioning Natalie as my artistic collaborator, I confronted my family at dinner. "Why did you lie?" I asked Natalie, tears stinging my eyes. "You never helped me. You do not even like art." My father put down his fork with that stern look that always silenced the room. "Your sister was being supportive, Amber. This constant jealousy is becoming a problem. Natalie is trying to help you gain recognition, and you respond with accusations." My mother sighed. "Honestly, Amber, you should be grateful. Having Natalie associated with your project gives it more credibility." Natalie simply smiled that perfect smile of hers and said, "I was just trying to help. You know how you struggle to explain your work." That night, I learned that my truth would always be secondary to the family narrative. I threw myself even more deeply into my art, creating an escape through my work. While Natalie followed the predetermined path to an Ivy League business education, I applied to art schools behind my parents' backs. When acceptance letters arrived, my announcement at dinner that I would be attending RISD was met with shock that quickly turned to anger. "We will not pay for you to waste 4 years on a hobby," my father declared. "If you want to throw away your potential, you will do it on your own dime." My mother tried a softer approach later that evening. "Darling, we just want what is best for you. Art is so unpredictable. What about marketing or art management? Those are respectable careers connected to your interests." But I stood firm in my decision, even as they cut off financial support. I cobbled together scholarships, loans, and worked 2 part-time jobs while studying. Every semester was a struggle to stay enrolled, while Natalie lived in a luxury apartment near Princeton, fully funded by our parents. During those college years, holiday breaks became increasingly tense. I would return home to find Natalie being groomed for the family business, sitting in on meetings with my father wearing tailored business attire that matched my mother's style. I showed up with paint still embedded under my fingernails, wearing thrift store clothes that fit my budget. By graduation, the division was complete. Natalie attended my ceremony, but my parents had a business emergency that prevented their appearance. I received a card with a token check that would not even cover a month of rent in any decent city. Meanwhile, Natalie received a new BMW and a junior executive position at my father's firm for her graduation. The contrast could not have been clearer. One daughter was the investment, the other was the liability. After graduation, I faced the harsh reality that many art majors confront: a world not eager to pay for their passion. With student loans looming and no family safety net, I moved into a tiny Brooklyn apartment with 3 roommates I found on Craigslist. The space was barely large enough for all of us, let alone for me to create art, but it was all I could afford while looking for work. Those first months were brutal. I applied to every gallery, museum, and art-related business in the city. Most never responded. A few interviews led nowhere when they realized I had no connections in the art world. My prestigious degree seemed worthless without the network that should have come with it. During this period, contact with my family dwindled to obligatory birthday calls and the occasional holiday text message. Natalie was thriving at our father's firm, already being featured in local business publications as a rising star. My parents traveled to Europe twice that year, visiting museums that showcased the same artists I had studied extensively. Yet they never thought to include me, or even ask for my insights. I took a job as a receptionist at a small gallery in Chelsea, barely making enough to cover my share of rent and my mounting student loan payments. But that position, as humble as it was, changed everything. The gallery specialized in contemporary art, with a focus on authentication and restoration. I spent every spare moment observing the experts who came through, asking questions during lunch breaks, staying late to watch their processes. About 6 months into my employment, a woman named Diana Reynolds visited the gallery regarding a potential Jean-Michel Basquiat piece that had surfaced in a private collection. Diana was in her 50s with a reputation as one of the foremost experts in authentication. Something about the piece did not sit right with her, though she could not immediately identify why. During her 3rd visit, I was alone in the gallery closing up, when she was still examining the work under special lighting. I watched her from my desk, fascinated by her methodical approach. When she sighed in frustration, I gathered my courage. "The spacing of the crown motif is wrong," I said quietly. "And the brushwork on the lower text lacks the spontaneity of his authentic works." Diana turned to me with surprise. "What did you say?" I swallowed hard, but continued pointing out several other inconsistencies I had noticed during her previous visits. Things I had observed after spending nights researching Basquiat's techniques and cataloging his known works. Instead of dismissing me, Diana invited me to coffee the next morning. That coffee turned into a 4-hour conversation about art authentication, forgery detection, and my background. By the end, she had offered me an apprenticeship with her firm, saying she had never met someone with such a natural eye for the subtle tells of forgery. Over the next 5 years, I built a new life under Diana's mentorship. I learned the science and art of authentication, how to analyze pigments, canvas, aging brush techniques, and the numerous ways forgers betray themselves in their work. My natural talent combined with rigorous training made me valuable in a field where expertise was rare and highly compensated. By 28, I had my own apartment in the city, a growing reputation and financial independence. I had found true friends who valued me for my mind and talents, not for how I fit into some preconceived family image. For the first time, I felt secure in who I was and what I could offer the world. My contact with family remained minimal. Christmas cards, the occasional text on birthdays. My parents had seemingly accepted that I was on my own path, though they never expressed any interest in understanding it. Natalie had married a man named Bradley Thompson, another financial advisor with the right pedigree and connections. Their wedding was featured in Boston Magazine, a society event I was invited to, but chose not to attend, sending a modest gift instead. Then came the surprising invitation. An email from Natalie in early November, unusually warm in tone, insisting that I come home for Thanksgiving this year. "The family misses you," she wrote. "It has been too long and we should all be together for the holidays. Mom and Dad talk about you more than you know." My first instinct was to decline. 5 years of distance had given me perspective on the toxic dynamics of my family, and I had made peace with keeping them at arm's length. But something about the timing felt strange. Why the sudden outreach after years of bare minimum contact? Curious, I checked my family's social media accounts, something I rarely did. My father's company website showed some concerning changes. 2 senior partners had left the firm and their annual client appreciation gala had been canceled for the first time in 15 years. My mother's usually active art acquisition posts had gone quiet for months. Something was happening with the family finances, and suddenly they wanted me, the long-ignored daughter, to come home. My suspicions were aroused, but instead of ignoring the invitation, I decided to investigate further before the visit. Through my professional connections, I discreetly inquired about my parents' art collection, which had been featured in several publications over the years. What I discovered was troubling. 3 significant pieces from their collection had appeared at auction in the past year, selling for well below their appraised values, and to anonymous buyers, a classic pattern when quick cash is needed. Armed with this information and a growing sense of unease, I accepted Natalie's invitation, but before boarding my flight to Boston, I made copies of the auction records and several other documents that might prove useful. Whatever game my family was playing, I would not be walking into it blindly this time. The taxi from Logan Airport wound through familiar streets, autumn leaves swirling in its wake as we approached the house I grew up in. The property looked immaculate as always, but I noticed subtle changes. The luxury cars in the driveway were last year's models rather than new. The seasonal decorations seemed more restrained than the elaborate displays my mother typically insisted upon. My father answered the door, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Amber," he said stiffly, giving me a brief hug that felt like a business greeting. "Good to have you home." My mother appeared behind him, elegant as always, in a cashmere sweater and pearls. But I noticed new lines around her eyes, a tension in her posture that makeup and designer clothes could not conceal. "You look well," she said, assessing my appearance. I had dressed carefully for this reunion, in a simple black dress and boots that projected professional success without trying too hard. "New York must be treating you kindly." "I have built a good life there," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "My work keeps me busy." Still with the art thing, my father asked, leading me into the living room where a fire crackled in the fireplace. "What exactly do you do again?" "Paint restoration." "Authentication and appraisal," I corrected. "I verify the legitimacy of artworks and estimate their market value." He nodded vaguely, clearly uninterested in the details. Before any awkward silence could settle, the front door opened again, and Natalie burst in with an exuberance that felt rehearsed. "My baby sister," she exclaimed, embracing me tightly. I cannot believe you are finally home. We have so much catching up to do. Her husband Bradley followed behind carrying luggage. He gave me a nod and a smile that seemed genuinely warm compared to my family's reception. Nice to finally meet you, Amber. Natalie talks about you all the time. This surprised me as I doubted I featured prominently in my sister's daily conversations. I watched Bradley carefully, noting how his eyes darted around the room, how his smile faltered when Natalie took his arm possessively. He was uncomfortable, though, trying to hide it. As we settled in for pre-dinner drinks, I took stock of the living room where my mother's prized art collection had always been displayed. Several pieces were noticeably absent, with lighter patches on the wallpaper marking their previous locations. A Winslow Homer watercolor had been replaced by a minor work by a lesser-known artist. An abstract expressionist piece that had hung over the fireplace for decades was gone, entirely replaced by a large mirror that conveniently made the room appear more spacious. I notice you have rearranged your collection, I commented casually, watching my mother's reaction. The Edward Hopper preliminary sketch is gone. My mother's hand tightened around her wine glass. We sent several pieces for cleaning and restoration. The humidity last summer affected some of the older works. All at once I asked innocently. Most collectors rotate restoration to maintain a complete collection. My father interrupted sharply. Not everyone follows the same protocols, Amber. Your mother has her own system. Natalie quickly changed the subject, launching into stories about her work at the firm and Bradley's recent promotion. Throughout dinner, I observed the subtle dynamics at play. My parents deferred to Natalie in conversation, while occasionally exchanging glances that conveyed unspoken tension. Bradley ate quietly, contributing little and drinking more than the others. After dinner, I excused myself to unpack in my old bedroom, which had long ago been converted into a generic guest room, all traces of my adolescence erased. As I arranged my belongings, I heard raised voices from my father's study downstairs. Moving quietly to the hallway, I caught fragments of an argument between Natalie and my parents. She does not suspect anything, Natalie insisted. Just stick to the plan. This is not what we agreed to, my mother responded, her voice strained. The Monet was never supposed to be included. We do not have a choice anymore, Natalie hissed, unless you want to lose everything. Their voices lowered, and I retreated to my room, mind racing. What exactly was the plan they referred to, and what did it have to do with my presence here? Later that evening, I slipped downstairs for water and encountered Nathan Cooper, our former groundskeeper's son, who had apparently been hired as my father's assistant. We had been friendly as teenagers before life took us in different directions. His presence was unexpected, but welcome, a familiar face not directly tied to family tensions. Amber Carter, he said with a genuine smile. The prodigal artist returns. Nathan, I replied warmly. I had no idea you were working for my father now. We chatted briefly about his job and my life in New York. As he prepared to leave for the night, he hesitated at the door. Listen, Amber, he said quietly, glancing around to ensure we were alone. Be careful with Natalie. She is not the same person you grew up with. There are things happening here that... He trailed off as footsteps approached. Things like what I pressed. Just watch yourself, he whispered. And maybe we can talk tomorrow. I have some information you should know. After Nathan left, I decided to do some reconnaissance of my own. The house was quiet, my family having retired to their respective rooms. I made my way to the small gallery space where my mother kept her most valuable pieces, using the flashlight on my phone to avoid turning on lights that might attract attention. What I found confirmed my suspicions. 3 of the remaining major works showed subtle but unmistakable signs of being forgeries. Not poor ones either, but sophisticated replicas that would fool most observers. The Monet water lilies my mother had mentioned in her argument was still present, but was definitely not the original I remembered from childhood. The brushwork was slightly too deliberate, lacking the master's spontaneous quality. The pigment aging was artificially accelerated rather than natural. Someone had been systematically replacing original artworks with high-quality forgeries and presumably selling the originals. Given the combined value of the missing or replaced pieces, we were talking about millions of dollars. And based on the conversation I had overheard, Natalie was at the center of this scheme. I returned to my room and carefully documented my observations, adding them to the file I had brought with me. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving, and I suspected it would bring revelations none of my family was prepared for. Thanksgiving Day dawned bright and cold sunlight, streaming through frost-covered windows. The house was already buzzing with activity when I came downstairs. My mother directed caterers in the kitchen, fussing over the placement of every dish and decoration. My father reviewed work documents at the breakfast table, seemingly oblivious to the holiday preparations swirling around him. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself coffee. "Can I help with anything?" My mother barely glanced up from inspecting a floral arrangement. "Everything is under control. Natalie is handling the seating arrangements, and the food is being managed professionally." Of course, Natalie was handling the seating. She had always been meticulous about controlling social dynamics, placing people where they could either shine or be diminished according to her designs. Throughout the morning, I observed the household preparations while casually examining more of the artwork throughout the house. My suspicions were further confirmed with each piece I studied. At least 8 major works had been replaced with forgeries of varying quality. Some were exceptional reproductions that most people would never question. Others showed telltale signs that anyone with my training could identify: inconsistent aging patterns, modern materials disguised as period-appropriate ones, brush techniques that mimicked but did not quite capture the original artist's hands. By noon, extended family began to arrive. Aunt Patricia and Uncle William, my father's older brother, who had made his fortune in real estate, came first with their adult children. Cousins I had barely spoken to in years greeted me with artificial enthusiasm, their eyes assessing my appearance and demeanor for signs of failure they could discuss later in private. Uncle William himself, an art collector of some renown, paused by a Degas reproduction in the foyer. I watched him closely, wondering if he would notice the substitution. He frowned slightly, but moved on without comment when Natalie swiftly approached to escort him to the bar. More relatives arrived, filling the house with forced laughter and the kind of surface-level conversation that passes for connection in families more concerned with appearances than authenticity. Natalie worked the room like a politician, touching arms, laughing at jokes, ensuring everyone had drinks and compliments in equal measure. She kept shooting glances my way, making sure I was not engaging too deeply with anyone. By the time we gathered around the elaborately set dining table, 22 family members were present. I found myself seated between a second cousin whose name I could barely remember and Bradley, whose discomfort had grown more pronounced as the day progressed. Natalie sat directly across from me, strategically positioned between my parents at the center of the table. The traditional Thanksgiving feast was served with military precision. Servers brought course after course, while my mother narrated the provenance of each recipe as if they were valuable artifacts rather than food. My father carved the turkey with the same methodical efficiency he applied to business deals. Natalie kept the conversation flowing skillfully, directing topics away from anything too personal or potentially revealing. I noticed she was drinking heavily, refilling her wine glass frequently, and becoming slightly more animated with each glass. Her perfect mask began to show hairline cracks, a slight edge entering her voice when Bradley attempted to contribute to the conversation. "So Amber," Aunt Patricia said during the main course, "Natalie tells us you work in an art gallery in New York. How quaint. Is it one of those modern places with the bizarre installations?" "Actually," I replied calmly, "I am an art authenticator and appraiser. I work with museums, auction houses, and private collectors to verify the legitimacy and value of significant artworks." Uncle William looked up with sudden interest. "Authentication. That is specialized work. Which firm are you with?" Before I could answer, Natalie interrupted. "Enough about Amber's little job. Did everyone hear about the charity gala I am chairing next month? We have already secured pledges from the governor and 2 senators. But Uncle William was not so easily diverted. I would be interested to hear more about your work, Amber. I have several pieces I have been uncertain about. I would be happy to look at them sometime, I offered, noting how my mother's knuckles whitened around her fork. The meal progressed, with increasing tension, simmering beneath polite conversation. As dessert was served, Natalie's movements became slightly erratic, her smile fixed and glassy. She stood suddenly tapping her glass for attention. The room fell silent. I want to thank everyone for coming to our family. Thanksgiving. She began, her words slightly slurred. Family is everything, is not it? The people who stand by you, who support your dreams, who contribute to the greater good of the whole. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. My father watched Natalie with growing concern while my mother maintained her perfect smile despite the warning in her eyes. Which is why Natalie continued, her voice hardening. We sometimes have to make difficult decisions about who really belongs. Her gaze fixed directly on me. We have tolerated Amber's rebellion for years. Her rejection of family values. Her refusal to contribute meaningfully to the Carter legacy. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Several relatives shifted in their seats, while others leaned forward with the gleam of anticipation that accompanies public conflict. Natalie, my father said, warningly, perhaps this is not the time. No, Dad, we agreed. She insisted, the flush of alcohol evident on her cheeks. We all agreed it was time. She straightened her shoulders and delivered the blow she had clearly been planning since my arrival. We voted, Amber. The family voted, and you are not part of it anymore. You are not family anymore. Gasps and murmurs erupted around the table. Some relatives looked shocked, others nodded in agreement. My parents sat frozen, neither contradicting nor supporting Natalie's declaration. Everyone here agreed. Natalie continued, gaining confidence from the chaos she had created. You contribute nothing. You take nothing. You mean nothing to the Carter name. I felt a strange calm settle over me as I looked at my sister's triumphant face, at my parents' averted eyes, at the mixture of embarrassment and morbid fascination on my relatives' faces. This moment of rejection should have devastated me, but instead it felt like the final confirmation of what I had always known, but never fully accepted. I laughed softly, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. Then you won't need this, I said quietly, reaching into my bag and placing a manila folder on the table. Family should have no secrets after all. Natalie stared at the folder with confusion that quickly turned to alarm. What is that supposed to be? Open it, I suggested. Since I am not family, I have no obligation to protect family interests, do I? With trembling hands, Natalie snatched the folder and flipped it open. Her face drained of color as she registered the contents: photographs of original artworks at auction, documentation of forgeries currently hanging in the house, financial records showing massive undisclosed transactions. This is nothing, she stammered, trying to close the folder. Just some work documentation. May I? Uncle William asked, reaching for the folder with the authority of the family patriarch. Natalie was too shocked to resist as he took it from her hands. As he reviewed the contents, his expression darkened. These are records of art forgeries, he announced to the stunned table, and sales of what appear to be original works from Richard and Eleanor's collection. He looked up at my parents. Did you authorize this? My mother's perfect composure finally cracked. William, this is a misunderstanding. But it was too late. Natalie, realizing her exposure, let out a scream of horror that silenced the room. You witch, she shrieked at me. You came here to destroy us. No, I replied calmly. I came because you invited me. The question is why, after all these years of exclusion, was my presence suddenly so important? Perhaps because you needed a scapegoat for the financial catastrophe you have created. The carefully orchestrated Thanksgiving dinner dissolved into chaos. Some relatives immediately made excuses to leave, gathering coats and muttering about family privacy. Others stayed riveted by the unfolding drama and eager to gather details they could dissect later. In the midst of the confusion, I remained seated watching, as years of family pretense and perfectionism crumbled under the weight of exposed truth. The reckoning had finally arrived. As the initial shock subsided, those who remained gathered in the living room, the abandoned Thanksgiving feast forgotten. Uncle William had taken charge, his authority as the eldest Carter sibling unopposed, even by my father, who sat with his head in his hands, looking suddenly aged. "Amber," Uncle William said gravely, "explain what you have discovered. All of it." I stood by the fireplace, aware of all eyes on me. For the past 2 years, original artworks from this house have been systematically replaced with forgeries and sold through various auction houses, primarily in Europe and Asia, where provenance questions might attract less attention. I pointed to the folder, now spread open on the coffee table. The records show at least 14 major works have been sold, generating approximately $7.6 million. The forgeries replacing them are of varying quality, some quite sophisticated, others showing clear flaws to trained observers. "This is absurd," my mother interjected weakly. "We would know if our collection had been tampered with." "Would you?" I asked. "When was the last time you had the collection professionally appraised or authenticated? Most collectors do this every 3 to 5 years. She had no answer, confirming my suspicion that their knowledge of art was superficial despite their extensive collecting. "The money," my father said hoarsely. "Where did it go?" All eyes turned to Natalie, who stood by the bar, pouring herself another drink with shaking hands. Bradley had moved away from her, standing closer to the door, as if preparing for a quick exit. "You do not understand the pressure," she said, her voice cracking. "The firm was in trouble. We lost 2 major clients last year. The market turned against our positions. I needed capital to cover the losses before clients found out." "You stole from your own parents?" Aunt Patricia asked, her judgment now directed at Natalie rather than me. "I borrowed," Natalie snapped. "I was going to replace everything once the market recovered. It was temporary." "And the forgeries?" Uncle William pressed. "Those required planning, connections to art forgers, a sophisticated understanding of how to move artwork discreetly." Natalie's eyes flicked toward Bradley, who paled visibly. "Do not look at me," he protested. "I told you this was wrong from the start." "You helped," she accused. "You connected me with Thomas for the reproductions." Bradley ran his hand through his hair in distress. "Because you threatened to implicate me in the firm's irregularities. If I did not, I never wanted any part of this." Uncle William turned to me. "How did you figure this out? You have not been home in years." I became suspicious when Natalie suddenly invited me for Thanksgiving after years of minimal contact, I explained. It seemed out of character. Then I noticed several pieces from the collection had appeared at auction recently. When I arrived, I confirmed my suspicions by examining the remaining artworks. "She is making this up," Natalie attempted weakly. "She has always been jealous of me, of my place in the family." "The evidence is quite clear," Uncle William replied, lifting a photograph from the folder. "This Monet sold at Sotheby's 8 months ago for $1.4 million. Yet, a very similar Monet still hangs in your mother's sitting room." He looked at me. "Is the one currently displayed authentic?" "No," I said. "It is a high-quality reproduction, but several technical aspects are wrong. The canvas is too new, artificially aged. The pigment composition includes elements not available when Monet was working. The brushwork is close, but lacks the spontaneity of the original." My father finally looked directly at Natalie. "How bad is it at the firm? The real situation?" Natalie's composure finally broke completely. "We are on the edge of collapse," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I made some high-risk investments trying to recoup earlier losses. They went bad. Then I used client funds to cover margins calls. It spiraled from there." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the situation became clear. This was not just about stolen art, but potential financial crimes that could result in serious legal consequences. Nathan, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "I have additional documentation," he said, surprising everyone. I have been tracking discrepancies in the firm's accounts for the past year. Client funds have been misappropriated signatures, forged on transfer authorizations. You were spying on me, Natalie gasped. I was doing my job, Nathan replied firmly. When I noticed irregularities, I documented them, rather than immediately reporting them. I hoped there was an explanation that would not destroy the company, and everyone who works there. My father stood up, his businessman instincts finally overriding his paternal blindness. We need to call the lawyers, now. As the family absorbed this development, relatives began to look at me differently. The black sheep daughter, long dismissed as impractical and unsuccessful, had uncovered a massive fraud that might have continued indefinitely without my specialized knowledge. The irony was not lost on anyone that my impractical art education had provided exactly the expertise needed in this crisis. Uncle William approached me while my parents huddled with Nathan reviewing his documents. Your work, he said quietly. Which firm did you say you were with? Reynolds Authentication, I replied. Diana Reynolds is my mentor. His eyebrows rose. Diana Reynolds is the best in the business. She does not take on associates lightly. She took a chance on me, I said simply. He nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps the wrong Carter daughter has been running things all these years. As the evening progressed, the family dynamics shifted like tectonic plates after an earthquake. Relatives who had always deferred to Natalie now approached me with questions and comments, suddenly discovering my existence after years of treating me as an afterthought. My parents looked shell-shocked, alternating between damage control discussions and staring blankly at the evidence of their daughter's betrayal. Natalie, seeing her carefully constructed world collapsing, made a desperate attempt to leave the house, grabbing her coat and car keys. Bradley blocked her path at the door. Move, she hissed. We need to leave now. No, he said firmly. Running will only make things worse, and I am not going to be your accomplice anymore. You already are, she reminded him viciously. Under duress, he replied. And I am done. I am staying to face this. You should too. The look of betrayal on her face, as her husband chose integrity over loyalty, perfectly mirrored how I had felt for most of my life in this family. The hours following the Thanksgiving revelation were a blur of phone calls, impromptu meetings, and legal consultations. Most relatives had departed, leaving only the core family, and those directly involved in addressing the crisis. Uncle William stayed his business acumen and calm demeanor, providing much-needed stability. My father spent most of the evening in his study, with the family attorney emerging occasionally with a grayer complexion each time. My mother alternated between silent shock and bursts of frantic activity, as if rearranging decorative objects could somehow restore order to our shattered family narrative. Natalie had retreated to the guest room she shared with Bradley, though he had chosen to sleep elsewhere in the house. Her occasional appearance was marked by red eyes and an expression vacillating between defiance and despair. Around midnight, when the house had finally quieted, I stepped onto the back porch for fresh air. The night was clear and cold stars, brilliant above the bare trees. I heard the door open behind me and turned to find my father looking smaller somehow in his rumpled shirt and uncharacteristically loose tie. The lawyers say we might be able to recover some of the artwork, he said without preamble. The provenance was falsified, but the sales themselves leave a trail. I nodded. Many buyers would prefer to return the pieces quietly rather than become entangled in a legal battle over stolen art. He was silent for a long moment. Why did you not come to us directly with your suspicions? Why the public exposure? The question struck me as so oblivious that I almost laughed. Would you have believed me over Natalie? Has that ever happened in our family history? His lack of response was answer enough. Besides, I continued, I did not plan the confrontation. Natalie orchestrated that herself, with her announcement that I was no longer family. She created the perfect moment for the truth to emerge. He sighed heavily, his breath visible in the cold air. The firm is in serious trouble. Nathan's documentation shows client fund misappropriation going back 18 months. We are looking at potential criminal charges, regulatory penalties, civil lawsuits. I am sorry, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, he was still my father and his life's work was crumbling before him. Your sister, he began, then paused to collect himself. Natalie will likely face criminal charges. The prosecutors might be willing to reduce them in exchange for full cooperation and restitution, but that depends on how much we can recover. I considered this information carefully. What do you need from me? The family lawyer thinks your testimony about the art forgeries would strengthen the case that Natalie acted alone in defrauding us. It would help separate the art thefts from the firm's issues, potentially salvaging something of the business. You want me to help protect the family name, I translated, after being told I am not part of the family. He had the grace to look ashamed. We never voted on anything. That was Natalie's invention. Your mother and I never. He trailed off, unable to complete the denial we both knew would be false. I will need to think about it, I said, finally. My cooperation would come with conditions. Before he could respond, the door opened again, and my mother stepped out. She had removed her makeup, revealing the true extent of stress on her face. The Lawrences just called, she said to my father. They are pulling their accounts first thing tomorrow. Word is spreading. As they discussed this new development, I slipped back inside, leaving them to the crisis they had enabled through years of willful blindness. The next morning brought a strange calm after the previous day's storm. Breakfast was a silent, awkward affair, with family members appearing briefly, before finding reasons to be elsewhere in the house. Nathan arrived early with more financial documents, now working openly to assess the damage to the firm. Around mid-morning, I encountered Natalie in the hallway outside the library. She looked haggard, her designer outfit from yesterday, exchanged for old sweatpants and a t-shirt I recognized from her college days. Come to gloat? She asked, her voice hoarse. No, I replied. I came for Thanksgiving dinner. Remember, you were the one with an agenda. She leaned against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted beyond her years. I really messed up, she whispered. I kept thinking I could fix it if I just had a little more time, a little more money. Why the art? I asked. Why not sell property or other assets that would be less noticeable? A bitter laugh escaped her. Because no one really looked at it. Mom and Dad collected art because it was prestigious, not because they understood or appreciated it. They could not tell the difference between the originals and the copies. There was a painful truth in her assessment. Our parents had built their collection as a symbol of wealth and taste, not out of genuine passion for the works themselves. And the plan for Thanksgiving, I pressed. Was I supposed to be the scapegoat somehow? She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, all pretense of dignity abandoned. The firm's annual audit is next week. Everything was going to come out. I thought if we could create a family drama centered on you, it might distract from the financial issues long enough for me to cover my tracks. That is why you announced the family had voted me out, to create a spectacle. She nodded miserably. I was desperate, and drunk, and terrified. And what about all those years before I asked the question that had lingered since childhood? Why did you always need to diminish me, to take credit for my accomplishments, to ensure I remained the family disappointment? For the first time, Natalie looked at me with something approaching honesty. Because you were free, she admitted. You had the courage to pursue what you loved, to walk away from their expectations. I resented that freedom so much. I was trapped in the role of perfect daughter, terrified of disappointing them. So you made sure I would bear that burden instead. Yes, she whispered, and I have hated myself for it. The more successful you became on your own terms, the more I resented you. The more determined I was to prove you had made the wrong choice. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. Decades of competition and resentment distilled into a moment of clarity that came far too late. I could help, I said finally. With certain conditions. She looked up, confusion, replacing the defeat in her eyes. Help how? I have connections in the art world. I could assist in tracking down and recovering the sold pieces. My testimony about the forgeries could help separate your personal actions from the firm's regulatory issues. It would not erase the consequences, but it might mitigate them. Why would you do that? She asked, genuine bewilderment in her voice. After everything. Not for you, I clarified. For the employees of the firm who might lose their jobs and pensions, for the clients who trusted our family with their financial futures, and maybe a little bit for our parents who failed us both in different ways. Later that day, my parents approached me together, the first united front they had presented since my arrival. They stood awkwardly in the doorway of the guest room, looking like visitors in their own home. Nathan tells us, you have offered to help with the art recovery, my father began. I nodded. I have contacts who specialize in exactly this kind of situation, but I have conditions. Name them, my mother said quietly. Full acknowledgement of what happened. No family cover-up. Natalie takes responsibility for her actions. Complete transparency with authorities. And a foundation established from recovered funds to support young artists, who, like me, might lack family support for their education. They exchanged glances, decades of marriage allowing for silent communication. Agreed, my father said. All of it. And one more thing, I added. An honest conversation about why you both were so willing to dismiss and diminish me all these years. Not today, not during this crisis, but someday soon. I deserve that much. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We failed you, she admitted. We had such rigid ideas about success and the right path. By the time we realized our mistake, the distance seemed too great to bridge. It was not the full conversation I had requested, but it was a start, an acknowledgement that had been decades in the coming. Throughout that day, various family members approached me individually. Aunt Patricia, who had always been particularly judgmental of my career choices, found me in the kitchen. I misjudged you, she said bluntly. All these years I thought you were the irresponsible one. We all played the roles assigned to us, I replied. She nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps. I should tell you my daughter Sophia struggled similarly. She wanted to study marine biology instead of law. I pushed her toward the practical choice. She paused. She is a corporate attorney now, successful by all standard measures, and profoundly unhappy. It is never too late to change course, I suggested. Perhaps I will tell her that, Aunt Patricia said softly. The most unexpected conversation came from Uncle William late that evening. I have a proposal for you, he said, finding me in the library. My collection needs proper authentication and management. I have been putting it off for years. Would you consider taking on the project? As a paid consultant, of course. The offer surprised me. I would need to coordinate with my existing clients, but yes, I could arrange that. Good, he said decisively. And perhaps you might consider establishing a Boston branch of your authentication firm. There is clearly a need for such expertise in this family. It was more than a business proposition. It was an invitation back into the family orbit, but on my terms, valuing my actual skills, rather than trying to force me into a predetermined mold. I will think about it, I promised. The days following Thanksgiving unfolded in a blur of legal meetings, financial damage assessment, and family reconfiguration. I extended my stay in Boston working with art recovery specialists to trace the sold pieces. Diana joined me from New York, lending her expertise and reputation to the efforts. The consequences were significant, but not as catastrophic as initially feared. 3 major artworks were recovered directly from buyers who preferred to avoid the publicity of possessing stolen art. Several others were located but would require legal proceedings to reclaim. The forgeries were removed from the house, each one documented as evidence. Natalie entered therapy, and a program for addiction issues that had apparently been developing for years beneath her perfect exterior. Her legal situation remained precarious, but her full cooperation and obvious remorse improved the prospects for a plea arrangement rather than a lengthy trial. The family firm survived, though significantly diminished. My father brought in outside management to oversee restructuring, accepting that the Carter financial dynasty would never be what it once was. Some clients remained loyal, valuing the decades of service before the recent troubles. My parents worked to rebuild their relationship with me, making awkward but sincere efforts to understand my world. My mother visited my apartment in New York, genuinely curious about my work for the first time. My father asked questions about art authentication techniques, finding unexpected parallels to financial forensics. The irony, he admitted during one conversation, is that the qualities that make you excellent at your job, attention to detail, analytical thinking, integrity, those were the same qualities I valued in business. I just could not see how they applied outside my narrow definition of success. By spring, 6 months after the Thanksgiving revelation, the family gathered again, this time for a smaller, more genuine celebration. The occasion was the establishment of the Carter Foundation for Arts Education, funded by recovered assets and dedicated to supporting young artists from diverse backgrounds. Natalie attended, now living in a modest apartment and working with a nonprofit organization as part of her community service agreement. The legal system had dealt with her actions firmly, but recognized the complex factors involved, including the tremendous pressure she had faced as the designated family success story. "I am looking at going back to school," she told me quietly during the reception. "I always had an interest in psychology that I never pursued, understanding why people do what they do, including myself." "That sounds like a good path," I replied sincerely. "I cannot undo what I did," she continued. "To the family, to the clients, to you. But I am trying to move forward with more honesty." "That is all any of us can do," I said, finding that the anger I had carried for so long had largely dissipated, replaced by something more complex, a mixture of caution and cautious hope. Diana watched our interaction from across the room, later commenting on the transformation she had witnessed. "When I met you, she said, you were so determined to prove yourself without family support. Now you have come full circle, using your success to help rebuild what was broken." "Not rebuild," I corrected. "Build something new. The old structure was fundamentally flawed." The foundation became my primary connection to Boston, requiring regular visits but allowing me to maintain my independent life in New York. Uncle William's authentication project expanded into consulting for several prominent New England collectors, creating a natural business expansion opportunity. My relationship with my parents evolved into something we were still defining, not the blind adoration they had given Natalie, nor the dismissal they had directed at me, but something more balanced, a relationship between adults with different perspectives but mutual respect. During a dinner to celebrate the Foundation's first scholarship awards, my mother raised her glass in a toast. "To finding family," she said, "not just in the people we are born to, but in those who see and value our true selves." It was not a Hollywood ending with all wounds magically healed. Natalie would always live with the consequences of her actions. My parents would always carry the regret of their favoritism and blindness. I would always have the scars of being the outsider for so many years. But we had found a new way forward, one based on truth, rather than appearances, on authentic connection, rather than prescribed roles. The painful revelation at that Thanksgiving table had broken the family mythology that had constrained us all, allowing something more genuine to emerge from the fragments. As I built my life with one foot in New York and one in Boston, I discovered that family-like art requires authentication, a careful examination, to distinguish the genuine from the false. Real connection cannot be forced into predetermined forms but must be allowed to develop according to its true nature. The greatest forgery had not been the paintings on the walls, but the family narrative we had all participated in, maintaining, each of us playing assigned roles that concealed rather than revealed our authentic selves. What do you think about family dynamics and the roles we get assigned within our families? Have you ever been pigeonholed as the responsible one, the rebel, the peacemaker, or some other family role? I would love to read your thoughts in the Praishanar. End of tdovla.com. Comments. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to redefine family relationships on more authentic terms. Thank you for listening to my journey from rejection to reconciliation, and remember that sometimes the greatest gift we can give each other is the freedom to be truly seen.